Welcome back to Genshin Interact. Today we're going to be taking a look at how you should be building Arlecchino. As always, make sure to like the video, and if you're coming back to watch our videos and aren't subscribed, go ahead and slap that subscribe button so you don't miss what's next. Also, if you are interested, we do have a Discord server and would love to see you there. Now with all that out of the way, on to the video.
So the first thing we want to talk about while looking into Arlecchino is before we kind of get into weapons and artifacts and obviously playstyle and whatnot, I do want to kind of just look at some things that you kind of need to keep in mind when you're looking at Arlecchino. The first thing is there's a big learning curve with her kit, very akin to how a child, there's a lot going on in his kit that you need to kind of understand before you just start, just running in and playing with him. And it's the same thing with Alhaitham as well, watching your mirrors and whatnot. It's very similar to how Arlecchino works. She's a kind of a difficult character if you don't really understand how she works. And so I'm just going to be going over a few things, and the learning curve with her kit is pretty big. Now, you kind of need to understand how her blood debt directives work. The first thing is kind of first and foremost, understanding that basically when you use your skill, you're going to be applying the blood debt directive, which looks like an X on an enemy. And if you are at C0 or C1, that blood debt directive has a 5-second timer basically, and then it turns into a blood debt due, which doubles the amount of bond of life that you can grab from it when you do a charge attack. So if you just grab a blood debt directive, you only grab, I think, 65% bond of life. If you grab a blood debt due and wait that 5 seconds and then do a charge attack and grab the blood debt due off the enemy, then you're actually getting 130%, which is more damage, more time, and bond of life, so it's a lot better for you. The other thing is, in combat, no one else can heal her. It's one of her passive talents, just to keep that in mind. Another thing is, in general, if you don't have the C1, it can become a little bit of an annoyance because you might get smacked around a little bit, kind of very similar to how Neuvillette's C1 acts. It's a pretty good amount of interruption resistance, and it'll help you, especially if you're a lot closer in combat. Without that C1, you might want to look at getting a shielder, which we'll talk about later in the video. Some relevant passives as well that you want to keep in mind, obviously, is the Agony Alone May Be Repaid, which is basically turning those blood debt directives into blood debt dues. Make sure to unlock that, and then that will allow you to actually be able to turn them into blood debt dues. So get to that point as quickly as possible. And then also, she's not stuck to her signature weapon. There's a pretty good amount of them, which makes it pretty nice for newer players to use her. It's, once again, the biggest thing is just the learning curve on her kit.
Now diving right into all the stuff you want to actually build for Arlecchino, we're first going to talk about some weapons. I'm going to talk about some 5-stars. And of course, the first 5-star on the list is going to be her personal weapon, Crimson Moon Semblance. It is obviously going to be her best in slot, and it's by a pretty big margin too, just because you're getting a lot of bond of life after you do charge attack hits, not just from her kit, but also from this weapon. And you'll get a damage bonus when the character has bond of life on them. So it makes sense that it's for Arlecchino at this point in the game, being one of the only characters that can put bond of life on herself. So as of right now, this is going to be very good for her. Some other options you could use, though, if you don't have her weapon or you're just not going for it, Primordial Jadewing Spear is actually a pretty decent option. It has a lot of the same stats as the best in slot that I just talked about, and the attack increase on the passive when you do hits can stack very quickly just because she is dealing damage with normal attacks, and it can, you can get that max stack very quickly, and so it's going to be a very good weapon for her. Now, right behind that, we do have Calamity Queller, which gives you that all elemental damage bonus, very good for her pyro damage, and after using a skill, the attack increase for 20 seconds with 6 stacks is going to be, once again, very good as an attack scaling unit. Right behind that, we also have Staff of Homa. Now, if you already have this is a very, very good polearm. Has been one of the best polearms, or even best weapons in the game for a very, very long time. This has a crit damage main stat, so it's going to be good there. And then it turns your HP into attack. So if you do already have this weapon, you can probably save some Primo Gems and just use this option for your Arlecchino, and it's going to have some very positive results.
Looking now at 4 stars beyond the 5 stars in general, for maybe if you just want to not have to worry about getting her personal weapon, or you maybe don't have Primordial from losing it from the standard or whatnot. Calamity Queller is Shenhe's weapon, and those were kind of in order on which one was best to worst. And I know Staff of Homa is a good weapon, and that's why it is in the list, but it is 4th place because the only thing that's really great about it is the crit damage main stat. The buff to attack is nice, but because, Arlecchino is not a heavy HP character, then it's not really great, in general over the other weapons. But the 4 stars, looking at these, probably the top 2, and I kind of always usually do this, but especially this one specifically, actually, I really like Battle of the Fjords. Now, this is a Battle Pass weapon, so you do have to get to the Battle Pass to actually do this. It has a crit rate main stat, which is obviously nice because we like the crit ratio. But also, when you have 3 different elemental types in the party, it'll give elemental mastery to the character of that weapon, which obviously, considering most of the time you're going to be doing Vaporize and whatnot with Arlecchino, it's going to be nice to actually have the extra boost to EM. The other weapon that you could use is Deathmatch, which also has a crit rate main stat at the same amount of Battle of the Fjords, and it has an attack increase when you obviously are near a certain amount of enemies. So if you're near one or less enemies, I think you have a 48% boost to attack, and then also when it's 2 or more, then it's actually going to be, it's a less amount of attack, but it also gives you some defense as well, which can make your Arlecchino a little bit stronger to maybe fend off the hits. Another weapon that you could use as a 4-star is Blackcliff Pole. It is a crit damage main stat weapon, which is pretty nice, and it's pretty good against hordes of enemies if you're looking at the passive as well. Dragon's Bane is an EM main stat weapon, and basically you do more damage against enemies that are affected by Hydro or Pyro, and like I said before, Vaporize is the main thing that you're going at here, so this makes sense for you to do more damage. The last weapon I want to talk about is Missive Wind Spear. This is an attack percent main stat weapon, and you could use the other attack percent main stat weapons as well. If you don't really care about the ability and you just want a good main stat, you could use some of the other polearms that have attack percent main stats. But this one's pretty good because the ability gives elemental reactions. Basically, when you do those, you get attack and EM. So if you already have Missive Wind Spirit, you could use it on her as well.
Next, talking about the artifacts you want to use on Arlecchino. I'm just going to be talking about some of the sets to use, and the very first one is going to be the one that was designed for her, and that's the Fragment of Harmonic Whimsy with the new area we recently got. This is going to have a 2-piece of attack percent, boosting her with 18% more attack, which is good because she's an attack scaling character, and in the 4-piece, this states that when the value of a Bond of Life increases or decreases, this character deals 18% increased damage for 6 seconds, and this has a max of 3 stacks, meaning you can get up to 54% increased damage, and you're going to be having this uptime pretty much all the time. Even though 6 seconds seems brief, her Bond of Life is changing all the time, especially when she's dealing damage, so you're going to have this all the time, 54% increased damage. So as such, this is going to be her best in slot artifact set to use. But honestly, if you don't have a lot of other characters, you know, it's the best set, but the domain isn't really worth it as far as resin efficiency, unless you really do want to go all out and really min-max your Arlecchino. And the reason I talk about that is because there also is just the 4-piece Gladiators finale. That's going to be a very, very good set for her. A very close second place, just because you're still getting the attack in the 2-piece, and the 4-piece is increasing normal attack damage by 35%. So you're going from 54% increased damage overall to 35% normal attack damage. So yeah, it's about a 20% difference, but it's still like, it's a very good option, and it's the second best, and it does compete with the Fragment. But the reason is it's really easy to get, and a lot of players, the more you played the game, the better chance you do have of having already good pieces on this set, just because this drops in a lot of different places, especially bosses. And then right behind that, we do have Shimenawa's Reminiscence, once again getting the attack in the 2-piece, and in the 4-piece, after you use the skill, your character will lose 15 energy if you have 15 energy, and then it'll increase your normal attack, charge attack, plunge attack damage by 50% for 10 seconds. So you're going to be getting that pretty good damage increase of 50% on your normal attack. So that is something you could use. Just one reason you may not like to use it or may not feel comfortable is because, yes, you are losing some energy. So just make sure that if you do use this set, you're able to still counter that with maybe a little bit more energy recharge than usual, just so you can be able to use your burst, because the burst still is very important to not only heal Arlecchino, but be able to reset the cooldown of her skill. Some other 4-pieces you could use are 4-piece Echoes of an Offering, just because of the attack increase and normal attack damage increase as well, much like Shimenawa and Gladiator for that matter. But there's also 4-piece Crimson just for the pyro damage and vaporize damage increase. You could also do 4-piece Marshazé for the normal attack damage from the 2-piece, and also the crit rate buff, which is, I will say, kind of a forced build, but could do wonders if you are getting hit a lot or you have a Farina on the team. Now, some of the 2-piece sets you could use, maybe you're farming up one of these 4-piece sets, you can mix match any 2-piece of Marshazé Hunter, Crimson Witch of Flames, any attack percent sets, and any EM sets. And for the EM sets, it's if you really want it, but honestly, the attack percent or other 2-pieces will probably just be better.
Looking at the stats that you want to basically be looking for with Arlecchino, the main stats you're looking at is an attack percent stance, a pyro damage bonus goblet, and a crit rate or crit damage circlet. Now, you want to basically, obviously, the biggest thing here, like always with your damage characters, is you're trying to balance out a crit ratio. And the reason, actually, I know some people have been talking about like an attack percent goblet. I would be okay with you using, an attack percent goblet if you did. but I would heavily suggest if you're going to do that, using a Viridescent Venery user, whether that be Sucrose, Venti, especially someone like Kazuha who can give an elemental damage bonus as well as the Viridescent resistance shred. I would say if you're going to obviously go for an attack percent goblet, you can, especially if it's on set for Fragment or whatever, or one of the other sets. If it's on set, that's great. But really, if you want to do that, I would heavily suggest trying to always keep a Viridescent user in the team. Some of the substats you want to obviously focus on are crit rate and crit damage first and foremost, and then attack percent. The reason actually attack percent is actually really, really good is one of her passive talents states that the more attack you have, the more resistance she gets, basically. So that kind of can help out a little bit more with just her in general not taking as much damage. Also, though, looking at beyond crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent, the next stat I would actually have above even flat attack would be energy recharge. And the reason energy recharge obviously is so good, just like Rift was talking about, you want to get your burst. It is a necessary need. Not only is it healing you, and it's the only thing that can heal you in combat, but you also want to make sure that you're focusing on resetting your skill cooldown as well, because it is pretty long. EM is nice, but she does so much damage already that taking away crit or attack percent, if it's one of those two, is not really worth it to get a small boost to EM. That's really not going to do anything in the long run.
Now looking at Arlecchino's Constellations, going right into the first one, this is a good damage increase, which is pretty nice, but what's even better about this Constellation is that you are getting a lot of interruption resistance, and I feel like that comparison can be made with other characters like Neuvillette. We've talked about before, and you've probably heard yourself, that Neuvillette's C1 isn't too much of a damage increase, but the reason that people love it so much is because it's just so nice to not be hit while charging up the charge attack. And so likewise, Arlecchino here is getting a very similar thing there, where you don't have to worry about getting knocked around and whatnot. It's not as important as Neuvillette just because you can dodge with Arlecchino and you're not really losing anything. Whereas like a character like Yoimiya, it becomes more of a sacrifice to dodge, because something so important about Yoimiya is just not losing her normal attack chain to ramp up the damage. Arlecchino, though, from what I've seen in testing, you don't sacrifice as much just because she's really dealing a lot of her damage in a front-loaded type of way, where if you know how Arlecchino works, a lot of her damage is very much at the start, and then it starts to go down because as you deal the normal attacks, you lose Bond of Life, which in her damage decreases, blah, blah, blah. So it's a very good constellation to get if you do want it. And it does set you up for the second constellation. And now Vixen said this is his favorite constellation, and I've already looked at it too, and it's the one I'd go for if I had Arlecchino myself, and it's her best early constellation to go for. Basically, you're getting a massive amount of damage once you absorb the Blood Debt directives, which in this constellation actually changed it to Blood Debt Due. So when you do consume those with your charge attack and you get that Bond of Life, you're going to also be dealing 900% of her attack as AoE pyro damage, and you can trigger that every 10 seconds. So it's just a massive, massive increase to the overall damage per rotation that you are doing. So if you did go for that C1, it's a good idea maybe to get that C2 if you're looking to get a little bit more out of your Arlecchino. And then that kind of segues into her third constellation. If you did get the C2, it's not a terrible thought to get the C3 as well, just because it gives you a little bit more damage and a little bit more edge on your Arlecchino, just because it is increasing the normal attack talent by 3. So that's going to be very good for her, especially just because all of her damage is coming from her normal attack. Now, our fourth, this is a good place to kind of just stop, just because it's just saying that when Arlecchino successfully absorbs the Blood Debt directives, Belmoon Rising's cooldown will decrease by 2 seconds, which that's talking about her burst, and 15 energy will be restored to her. And this can occur every 10 seconds. So overall, it's more of a quality of life. A good build should solve the energy problem already, and there's no real reason to actually need to be using the burst any sooner than it already is in her kit. So it's not necessary of a constellation. I definitely personally wouldn't recommend it, and I know Vixen wouldn't either. The C5 just increases your burst level by 3, and now the C6, in a nutshell, the C6 just makes your burst go nuts. If you were going to C6 a character, the numbers people have hit are crazy with it. I mean, we're talking like 8 to 9 million damage across the board. At least that's the highest that we've seen at the time of recording this. And so you've seen that in a lot of other characters. Most characters you see 6 are going to hit crazy damage ceiling numbers like that per rotation and whatnot. So if you have the C6, that's great, and I'm envious of you, but just know that it's not necessary, and a good place to stop is going to be that C2.
Now looking at teams, just kind of quickly running through here, there's a lot to look at with teams, even though really I would only place her in 2 teams. First and foremost, obviously the Vaporize team. It's going to be your best team in my own personal opinion. You could run an Arlecchino, obviously, with a great Hydro Applier, a Viridescent user, and Bennett. And the reason I say a great Hydro Applier is you need someone who's going to be really, really good at Hydro application, and that's going to be either Yelan or Xingqiu. I'm sorry, no one else is really going to be able to constantly keep up with that from my own personal experience. Even someone like Farina as well. Believe me, I've damage tested it. I had a C6 friend that helped me try to damage test it. And at that point, I was putting out too much pyro to the point where my friend who had a C6 Farina was actually vaporizing more than I was. So it was taking away damage from Arlecchino just because that application for Hydro isn't as good. So you need Yelan or Xingqiu to really do that. Now, Arlecchino could be put in another similar vaporized team where it's double pyro, double hydro. Not only does that help increase HP, especially if you've got, Staff of Homa, if you threw that on, but it's also good for the double attack, obviously, for our double pyro, which gives you attack, which you already have in the last one as well. But this is going to fix a lot of things if you really want to use Farina, for instance, and you want to, I don't know, throw on the Mare Chassé. You have the double resonance and whatnot. But if you're using Farina, you could also use Yelan and Xingqiu as well to kind of pick up the slack of that hydro that she's not really. I mean, she's a good hydro player, but it's not crazy to the amount of Yelan and Xingqiu to keep up with Arlecchino. And so if you can throw Yelan and Xingqiu in here as well, not only are you helping Farina do more damage, but you're also helping Arlecchino actually vaporize consistently as well. Another way that you could do this, especially, this is kind of my no C1 team. So if you don't have that first constellation, you can use Arlecchino, Yelan, or Xingqiu for that great hydro applier stack area. And then Shielder, you're going to want to obviously focus on, either Zhongli or just a really well-built shielder that you already have, and then throwing in Bennett. Alongside of this as well, some notable teams that I think obviously are going to work extremely well with this. Arlecchino, Yelan, Kazuha, Bennett, that's probably my best team, and that's what you're going to really see probably the most of the time. You can swap Yelan out for Xingqiu, and or use Sucrose, Jean, Venti in place of where Kazuha is in this team. Arlecchino could be used with Farina and Yelan and Bennett, that double pyro, double hydro thing. And like I talked about, you could switch out those hydro slots for Farina, Yelan, Xingqiu, Mona, Kokomi. And then obviously the last shielder team you want to focus on, like Yelan, Arlecchino, Zhongli, and Bennett. So Zhongli obviously can be switched out with some characters like Toma or Xinyan or Layla or Diona. You're just really going to focus on wanting a heavy shielder so you don't get knocked around. The last team I want to focus on is the Overload team. It's got some pretty good damage, but it's not better than Vaporize at the end of the day, and basically always run Chevreuse. So I wouldn't necessarily say to run this if you don't have her, but two great teams for this is Arlecchino with a really good Electro Applier, Chevreuse and Bennett. You've got your double pyro, or triple pyro actually technically, and that's why you need a really good electro character to be constantly applying electro, whether you use Yaimiko or Fischl. These would kind of be my only two options of who I would use. And then you could do double electro and double pyro. That fixes a lot of maybe questions with some energy issues if you're having with Arlecchino. You're always going to want to keep Chevreuse though, so no Bennett. You want Arlecchino and Chevreuse as your two pyro. Your two electro could be Yaimiko, Fischl, Kuki, Dori, even Beto, especially since you're close range. Those attacks could, obviously that shield that she uses could actually be hitting things as well in that burst state. So those are kind of the teams that I would run. I have tried, even actually tested this with Rift. I used my Shan Yun, and we had a Farina in there, and we tried a Bennett as well. We tried a bunch of different combos to make basically Arlecchino go plunge. It doesn't work that well, obviously, because the Mask of the Red death damage that you're doing most of the time is not going to help any of your plunging attacks. I also tried a Melt team, but there's no great cryo appliers right now even. I used my C6 Diona, which gives me 200 elemental mastery, and obviously a field of cryo. I used a Kazuha burst that was swirled on cryo, and I used a Shenhe burst, which is constantly applying cryo as well. And even all three of that didn't help me consistently hit melt, and so my damage was kind of like just up and down consistently. So it was spike and then it would go away, then it would spike and then it would go away. So until we get a better cryo applier, I would probably just stay away from melt especially. Well, that's everything we have looking at Arlecchino. We hope you enjoyed the video, and hopefully we could have helped you in building Father. If you did, please go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to connect with us more, or I don't know, just chill with us and some other Genshin fans, go ahead and join the Discord down below in the description. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.